Alrighty, I am back, ready to read chapter 9 from Summer with the Marine. We are halfway through the book, and we'll just see how this goes. The house is quiet this morning, so I'm taking advantage of that, and I think there are only 12 chapters. Gosh, I need to do voice exercises. I think there are only 12 chapters in this book, if I remember correctly, so we will just see how far we get today. Okay, here we go. Chapter 9, Eisley. For the next few days, Eisley didn't walk, she floated. She didn't move, she danced. She would have been singing too, but the virtual assistant robot had deflated her confidence when she'd driven from Baltimore to Florida. Something had lit up inside her, and she was quite sure it was as bright and strong as the sun. She told Ford that she loved him. He'd said it back. They'd kissed. They'd gone on a date, and it was just the beginning of their future together. As she wiped down the tables in the dining room at Coconut Cove Cafe at the end of the night, the sound of her name interrupted the tune she hummed. Somehow she'd acquired her mother's ability to overhear things even though she'd never dare be a gossip. I have no idea what's gotten on into her, Chelsea said. She's been like this for days. And there I thought I'd be mopping her up off the floor every night, Billy said. Eisley turned and squeezed the rag in her hand. What's that supposed to mean? Was Billy trying to burst her bubble? Betty stepped forward. Now, ladies, Billy meant that when you'd arrived in town you were a bit... Betty drooped. Down. I wasn't down. I'd been through a terrible breakup. Well, a year before, I'd lost my job, which I hated, but still, I lived with 3 other women, one who had a ferret and only came out of her room at night. Why do you think that was, dear? Betty asked, stepping closer. Well, I thought she worked night shifts, but I think she was actually nocturnal. I mean, she had a ferret, so you never know. Not that I have anything against ferrets, but it was just smelly and... You're rambling, Claudia said. They mean when you came here you seemed down. Why do you think that was? I think the Florida sunshine cheered you up. I wasn't down. I'm like the most optimistic and happiest person I know. She was being unnecessarily defensive, but wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of knowing that the date dare had actually worked, mostly because she was afraid to jinx it. I happen to think she's in love, Betty said. Maybe the old woman was a psychic on top of being a sassy waitress, beloved in the community, and quickly becoming a good friend. Nonetheless, she wasn't ready to admit all of that publicly. In love with a certain soldier who came through those doors last week. Billy waggled her eyebrows. Eisley shifted from foot to foot and then returned to cleaning the table. You've done that one already, Billy said, pointing to the already polished table. I think she was already in love, Betty said. Okay, fine, you're right, Eisley said, tossing down the towel. I've loved Ford Armstrong since I was basically since I can remember. We went on a date last week and... All 3 women leaned in. We caught up, put the past behind us, and... She hesitated. And you're excited but also afraid you might somehow jinx the future, Betty finished for her. Are you a fortune teller or mind reader or something? Eisley asked. Betty beamed. No, I'm just old. Some might say wise. Billy gripped the woman's arm and pulled her into a hug. A fuzzy welling of emotion came over Eisley then. She opened her arms wide like her mother did and pulled them all into an embrace. Gratitude overwhelmed her. Had she not gone to Blue Bay Beach? Had her mother not connected her with the job? Had Billy not hired her? Had Claudia not inquired about the so-called Mr. Fisher? And had Betty not dared her to go on a date with the next guy she waited on? She may not have crossed paths with Ford again. It was a small town, but he'd recently left for a few days because he had a meeting out of town. Had everything not happened in that order, they may not have met again. Thanks, ladies, Eisley said. Billy was the first to shrug out of the hug, but Betty turned up the music, the oldies station she always had playing during her shifts, and they finished cleaning up. While Eisley wiped off the ketchup bottles and refilled the sugar packets, she thought about Ford's return. In all their conversations, they'd avoided talking about life when the summer was over. She assumed he was on leave and would return to some far-flung post overseas. That thought made her droop, but the song changed, and with surprising skills, Betty shimmied across the floor toward her with the mop in hand, swinging it around like a microphone stand and pretending to sing to the Elvis Presley hit. Soon, all 4 women were dancing, smiling and laughing. However, Claudia was just bopping from side to side as though not sure what to do with her arms and legs. When the song changed, they plunked into the chairs at the usual table where they counted out tips and chatted. Betty, you have some good moves. She waved her hand dismissively. Gus and I have been dancing for decades. We should have a dance party, Eisley joked. Okay, I do have some moves. Before your uncle built this restaurant, we would occasionally dance on the dock. Of course, someone would inevitably fall in, and Betty's eyes crinkled with laughter, likely at a funny memory. You can imagine how that ended up. The women joined in the laughter. Have you lived here your whole life? Claudia asked. Born and raised. Billy, too. Something like that, Billy said quietly. So Betty is an original Blue Bay Beach babe, Claudia said. The older woman smiled. Gus and I met at another beach down the way. It was a bonfire party back in the day. That was the first time we'd danced, but wasn't the last. You see, I had to sneak away because this town was so small everyone knew everyone else's business. Still is small and everyone still knows everyone else's business, Billy grumbled. But it was built by some amazing people, dedicated to keeping it off the map to preserve it as a paradise of sorts. Don't get me wrong, we welcome tourists and plenty of developers have tried to come in and take our land, but Betty shook her head. Over my dead body. Betty owns half the town, Billy chimed in. Do you live in one of those big mansions? Claudia asked. No, my daddy sold that land, reasoning it was too close to the water. He'd say if there was ever a storm, anything built there would be the first to go. Obviously, prevention measures and construction methods have changed and improved. I see how they would have been at risk. Now they're specialty built. But the old shacks that used to be along that way would have surely blown out to sea, Billy added. Betty snorted. Some of them did. What was it like when you were younger? Claudia asked. Much like it is now without cell phones. This has always been a fairly sleepy town. I mean, we have many more shops and establishments now, but the palms always swayed in the breeze. The sand has always been bleached white and the water crystal clear. You were saying about dancing on the docks? I could never do that. Claudia shook her head. I thought you were a musician. Surely you have rhythm and can dance. A classical pianist, Claudia corrected. You mean you don't loose pound away on the keys from time to time? Betty asked, mimicking the motion as if the table were a piano. Claudia laughed at the silly notion. No, but I've always wanted to know how to dance. I'll teach you. Betty got to her feet. Claudia shook her head, but eventually Betty coaxed her up. The others joined, even Billy, who seemed to be an unlikely participant. Then again, once business was over for the day, she always let her hair down. I'd like to see Ford on the dance floor, Eisley called over the music. I thought you've been friends with him since high school, Billy asked as they did the twist to the famous Chubby Checker song. We went to dances as a group in high school. He asked someone else to prom. Like the prom queen or something? Claudia asked. No. One of my good friends. Ouch. Billy wrinkled her nose. Eisley nodded. Did she say yes? Sure did, and called me the next day to tell me all about it. Eisley sighed at the memory. It should have been her. She and Ford should have danced together at prom. Some friend. Not anymore. Eisley shook her head. As the song continued, Claudia got down, shaking her hips the same way Betty demonstrated. I feel like I'm in one of those summer movies. Mamma Mia, Eisley shouted, her favorite summer movie, which had lots of singing and dancing and had possibly been the reason she got the job at the restaurant when Billy had asked for her taste in movies. I was thinking The Summer House, Claudia said with a smirk. Glad you didn't say dirty dancing. There'll be no dirty dancing here, Billy said around a laugh. This is a family-friendly establishment. Good thing I don't really know how to dance. Claudia lifted and lowered her eyebrows. Well, you're up next. We just had to see how Eisley date was going to play out. You can't get me too excited. Remember, I only work here twice a week, Betty said, shimmying. The four women laughed again. We really should have a dance party out there on the patio deck. There's an oldies cover band we could invite. Eisley had seen a flyer in town. She could bring Ford. Billy whistled. They could have their prom do-over, Claudia added. Eisley filled the other two in on the prom disappointment. Let's do it. We'll do it for Eisley and Ford, and maybe it'll raise some extra money for the restaurant. Betty eyed Billy. They spent the next hour planning what they called Beach Blast from the Past dance party with a bonfire like Betty used to go to when she was younger. Even as the night wore on and Eisley's eyes got heavy, Betty seemed invigorated and younger than them all as her excitement grew. Chapter break. The next day, Eisley was exhausted, but she and her mother had to drive over an hour to get some supplies because there was talk of a tropical storm coming. We've been through plenty of winters up in New Jersey, but these tropical storms are nothing to sneeze at, Diana warned. Eisley wondered if Ford would be back. In fact, she wondered where he lived or if he was staying at the Sandy Shore Inn in town. For most of the ride there, Diana asked questions about Ford. Ordinarily, Eisley would have been happy to answer, but felt a little awkward talking about her love life with her mother. She repeatedly tried to steer the conversation to ice cream, the dance party, and even canasta strategies. Finally, she said, Mom, the traffic is picking up. I should concentrate on driving. Once they reached the store, her mother rattled off her list of supplies as they wandered through the aisles. You know, I used to have 3 manual can openers. Should have saved them. If the power goes out, my electric one will be useless. It looks like you parted with a lot of things when you moved. Eisley was mostly relieved at that because back in New Jersey, her mother had saved everything. No, it's all in a storage locker. Mom, you're paying to store stuff you're never going to use again? No, I'm joking. I wanted a fresh start, but I did photograph and digitally store all of the artwork you created over the years, your awards and certificates. I wanted to preserve all of your achievements. The words fresh start and achievements echoed even as her mother continued to read her list and drop things in their cart. She didn't want to think about how her achievements had basically stopped when she'd gone to college, and it became clear Ford made a clean break from his old life, ending their friendship. As for her fresh start, she was still working on that. It may have been the gathering clouds, but as they rolled back into Blue Bay Beach, she felt reflective, pensive. The estates lining Mansion Mile on one side of the street came into view. She wondered what life would have been like if she allowed herself to succeed instead of remaining locked in the mire of her repeated failures. It was like she was afraid to move on. She always had one foot in the past, as though waiting for Ford and the other, waiting to grow up and get on with her life. She blinked a few times as a familiar figure, dressed in a white t-shirt, got out of a Jeep and walked into the biggest mansion on the street. Her stomach twisted. Her heart sank. She'd been wrong about Ford. Much had changed, and clearly he wasn't the person she thought he was. As they continued on, a splinter drove itself deeper, splitting her between sadness and anger. She felt like she might snap. Uh-oh. So that was the end of chapter 9. We have a few more chapters to go. I am a reader that is always like, oh, one more chapter. So I think we'll continue. So I'm going to save this, download it, and then hop on a new live so that, each chapter is separate so people can kind of like, as if, where you put your bookmark in a book. Okay, so if you are joining me, just look for my live to pop up in about 1 minute. Thank you.